Following the American Revolution, the United States was wary of a very powerful central government, such as Great Britain, which had oppressed them and instilled the very policies which led them to revolution. However, very quickly, this weak government was proven to be ineffective in running a nation, and as such, a new one was called for, and in 1787, the Constitution of the United States was adopted, making a stronger federal government. This document was full of compromises and discussions, which settled issues from many different groups and competing political ideologies. However, now we are going to explore what if the Constitution was never ratified. The Articles of Confederation had multiple weaknesses. Firstly, as a federal government, it was unable to raise taxes nor regulate commerce between all of the states. Additionally, it could not enforce national policies and was completely at the whims of individual states which wanted to act in their own self-interest over the benefit of the nation as a whole. Several events brought this to national attention, such as Shays' Rebellion and the inability of the government to deal with that. Additionally, economic pressures from printings of multiple different currencies and an inability to have uniform trade policy resulted in tough pressures on the U.S. government and an overall poor situation. As a response to this, in 1787, the Constitutional Convention was called. The Collapse of the United States, 1787 to 1801. Entering in the Constitutional Convention, there were two major plans proposed by different states for how this new government should be run. Firstly, the Virginia plan wanted a bicameral legislature with proportional representation for each state. This would protect the interests of larger states, as they would be able to have the most power due to their larger populations within government, thus gaining the most representatives within the federal government. Additionally, the Virginia plan called for a stronger federal government, seeing the ineffectiveness of the Articles of Confederation. In contrast, the New Jersey plan would serve as merely an evolution on the Articles of Confederation, rather than a complete revolution under the Virginia plan. This would involve a unicameral legislature, similar to the Articles, where each state gets one vote. This would protect the interests of the smaller states, as they would be on the same footing as larger states such as Virginia and New York. Additionally, the New Jersey plan included limits on the federal government. States were divided by regions within this timeline, as Federalists and Anti-Federalists are completely unwilling and unable to compromise. Rhode Island, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia refused to ratify any document without an explicit guarantee of citizens' rights, whereas the northern states are holding true to their Federalist ideas and don't want to potentially compromise this new document and have it proved too weak, just like the Articles of Confederation. This has driven a division between the states and has resulted in them grouping together based off these geographic regions and in attempts to form their own plans for how to govern themselves. The only question which remained was the allegiance of two important states, Maryland and Virginia. Both Maryland and Virginia did not have particularly strong ties to the Anti-Federalist Party. Although within rural Virginia, Anti-Federalists was certainly present, and there were some prominent Anti-Federalists such as Thomas Jefferson. However, Virginia was home to several very prominent Federalists, such as James Madison, the author of the Constitution, and George Washington. Additionally, Virginia and Maryland were hesitant from joining the Northern Union because they were both slave states and would become the only slave states present within the Northern Union. As such, and in order to preserve slavery and their primary economic enterprise behind closed doors, they pledged allegiance to the Southern states in their new plan of union. This brought the total balance of power to being relatively equal, with a mix of large states distributed across both the northern states and the southern states, with Rhode Island being the only state that is not homogeneous with the rest of its kind. After the decision to join with the southern states, Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter explaining his actions, "I had rather ask an enlargement of power from the nation, where it is found necessary, than assume it by a construction which would make our powers boundless." In contrast, George Washington, a prominent Federalist, along with James Madison, both were considered defectors by the Virginian people, as they move up north to New York to help establish the new proposal for government up there. George Washington's support is a major victory for the North, as he is almost universally loved by Americans and still remembered as being the hero of the Revolution, adding legitimacy to their form of government. Western expansion only leads to more problems between the two nations. The new territories of Kentucky and Tennessee are added before the end of the century, and they support the more states' rights-focused plans of the South, given both the presence of slavery in all of their states and just their geographic distance to that area. They feel isolated from the North and disenfranchised by the Federalists in the large cities of New York City. Despite westward expansion and the states grouping together to form these new forms of government, no public plans have been shared yet. Additionally, no state has openly talked of secession, only in closed-door meetings, as no one wants to leave the Union, hoping the Articles of Confederation can persevere and the American experiment can continue. However, the uncaring force of global economics will prevent this from happening, primarily with the quasi-war with France in the late 1790s, resulting in the impressment of Americans and the seizure of American merchant vessels, leaving the U.S. government helpless to stop it under the Articles of Confederation without enough power to enforce its own policies. Additionally, the states keep piling on more debt on top of the out-of-control revolutionary debt owed to France and other European nations by the United States. Each state is also printing its own currencies and money, creating a very unstable economic situation domestically and making foreign exchange much more difficult. Further rebellions inspired by Shays' Rebellion continue under the Articles of Confederation, as the document is completely and totally unable to enforce federal policy and results in the collapse of the nation. But out of these ashes arise a new state. In the North, led by President George Washington in the election of 1800, is the Federal States of America, a unitary federal state governed by the Federalist Party, running with a constitution very similar to our current U.S. Constitution, with a notable exclusion of a Bill of Rights. Due to the complete lack of anti-federalists within power, there was deemed no need for that, and the fears of too weak of a government resulted in the passing of this document. However, there are still checks and balances on the branches to ensure that the government does not get too powerful. Additionally, it does reflect an element of the New Jersey Plan to balance out the power of large states such as New York and Pennsylvania with smaller states such as Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Thus, it has a bicameral legislature just like the current United States. The Southern Plan was finally brought together in the Union of American States under Thomas Jefferson. A head of state was needed under this plan, despite the Articles of Confederation lack of one for foreign diplomacy, and as such, Thomas Jefferson, former U.S. ambassador to France, was appointed to the task. This represents almost exclusively the New Jersey Plan, having a single body which governs the national affairs, which can raise taxes and can regulate commerce, however, not much else. The states were able to exist peacefully when they saw themselves as much more independent nations before the Revolutionary War, and so the common sentiment was they could do the same afterwards and after the collapse of the Articles of Confederation. Perhaps that government was simply too large. However, Event 2, the race west and degrading relations, will prove that that is a terrible, terrible mistake. The desire for new land will be a motivating factor for both the federal states and the Union of American States. However, the Union of American States will primarily take on the ideas of manifest destiny and want to spread their own culture. This is due to a combination of regions. Firstly, the federal states, with their federalist policy focusing mostly on cities and development, are going to look at internal improvements first over expanding to more lands. Additionally, because they are focusing on more trade, commerce, and seagoing vessels, they are able to develop without needing more land within the United States itself and still thrive economically with a strong central economy. Whereas the Union of American States is very much focused on plantation farming, which requires large tracts of land for the growing of cash crops such as tobacco and cotton. Additionally, prospectors will discover gold within Cherokee land. This will happen much earlier than in actual U.S. history because of the immediate threat posed by the federal states of America within the minds of southern prospectors to want to claim as much land as possible before it can be claimed by those in the north. Additionally, the amount of farmers within the Union will result in a large number wanting more land to continue to grow and develop. Finally, there was political backing for expansion that just physically does not exist in the North, with warhawk politicians such as John C. Calhoun and Henry Clay pushing for the exceptionalism of the Union of American States and wanting to see it expand and spread out across the entirety of North America. The Federal States of America developed a concise plan to help deal with their revolutionary debt. Firstly, the President, George Washington, and Vice President Hamilton would agree to send John Jay to Great Britain in an effort to negotiate a trade treaty, in an attempt to prevent British interdiction of federal ships. This proved to be successful as they are able to help revitalize the federal economy and able to start having a very centralized plan to pay off the debts of all of the member states of the Federal States of America. Contrarily in the South, innovation in the cotton gin made slavery more profitable and resulted in further entrenchment of slavery within the South and a focus on more land to be able to continue growing crops in order to make more money. Additionally, by finding gold in Cherokee land, President Jefferson realized the massive amount of wealth they could gain through the securing of this land and opening up for prospectors. Additionally, at this time, the French Revolution and early phase of the Napoleonic War were happening, and due to the typical French sympathies of people in the South and the French leanings of President Thomas Jefferson, there was trade with France in arms industries and support provided by the Americans to help assist the French. Relations between the two nations had been relatively peaceful up till this point in 1803, with the sale of Louisiana to the Union of American States by France. The Federal States of America was now almost outlanded 3-1 by the Union of American States and felt completely threatened by this action. Due to their closer trade ties and due to the conflict between Britain and France, the Union of American States allies itself with France, and the Federal States of America allies itself with Britain out of fear of aggression by either party over this action. This begins a slippery slope of deteriorating relations between the two nations. Secondly, due to the amount of reliance on trade by the Federal States of America, the Barbary Wars are fought, and the Federal States of America were hoping for support of the Union of American States in contributing ships due to protecting mutual trade interests. However, the Union of American States decided it is not in their best interest to help out the Federal States, and results in the contribution and death of lots of Federal boats and sailors to secure a trade which benefits both nations, angering the Federal States against the Union. Additionally, Warhawks within the Union of American States, after this new acquisition of land, were very confident that based off military experiences with the Cherokee and the amount of territory they had, in addition to being backed by France with the return of Napoleon, that they would be able to overpower and overtake the Federal States of America, unifying the continent under one government again. The primary proponents for this theory were John C. Calhoun and Henry Clay. Event 3. War of the Sixth Coalition, North American Theater, 1812 to 1817. War started in this time period because of Napoleon's return from exile in Elbe and building nationalism and militarism within the Union of American States. Thomas Jefferson's foundation of the military academy, in addition to victories over native groups, led to an increased belief that their military was powerful and they would be able to stand up to and fight against the Federal States of America and unify the continent. A comparison of the two nations demonstrates that they both have relatively equal populations, despite the large land advantage of the Union. Additionally, the Union's army has had much more experience and is much larger, as several Federalists did not believe it was necessary to their best interest, focusing instead on maintaining a professional navy. However, the British allies of the Federal States were willing and able to contribute militias from Canada and Royal Marines to support them, whereas Napoleon largely ignored the New World during the Napoleonic Wars, leaving the Union of American States by itself. So, in a straight-up traditional fight between the Federal States of America and the Union of American States, given its land superiority and larger army, and its mostly domestic area as opposed to an economy relying on international trade which could be interdicted by the Federal States, warfare would go in favor of the Union of American States. However, given that this is a global system and how there are multiple countries, due to support of the British Empire and the overall defeat of Napoleon in the Sixth Coalition War, the Federal States of America will end up annexing and controlling the entirety of the Union of American States, once again bringing the country under single rulership.